As before, I am not going to go into long introductions. I'm Laura Green. I'm a member of the English department. That's enough of an introduction for me. You have descriptions of everybody else's paper in your program. I just want to say about the time that this panel goes until 12:30. We want to leave about half an hour for questions and answers, as we did just now. That means that everybody will be talking, I hope, for somewhere between 15 and 20 minutes. And so at 15, you might see me pass a note, just so that people know what the time is. So without further ado, is your technology good?
Okay, so how's everybody?
Good.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you for having me. I am not going to talk about my book, which is coming out in less than a month. So in the series, it's edited by two of the most incredible people on the planet. One of them is named Susanna. But that's just me. This is my second book that I'm currently working on, and this is part of that work. And what I look in this book particularly talks about the politics of racial desire, and I wanted to talk a little bit about representations of racial desires. And I want us to think about this ad. So in this very famous ad, the actor uses lines like, now, look at me. Now look at your man. Now look at me. Sadly, he's not me. Right? The implication, of course, is that he can be him if he would just use Old Spice. Now, this ad actually won an Emmy Award. Now, the problem, of course, is that it plays upon old tropes of the Mandingo. And whereas the Mandingo, the new Mandingo is no longer a violent person that can take your woman, he is still nonetheless able to take your women with very, quote, cool catchphrases, which is the way that the New York Times represented this ad as being, and how great it was. Now, clearly, in the ad, the man does not read as being gay. However, gay media...
You want to rethink that?
Let me rephrase. The man is not meant to be read as gay. However, gay tropes and gay representations pull upon these larger existing racialized tropes. And what I want to talk about is how are gay men of color represented in both text and images, particularly in gay media? How are gay men of color portrayed differently from gay white men? How do these differences maintain a hierarchy of desirability among gay men? And more importantly, why is this done? So here we have two covers of Out magazine. So part of my work looks at the presentation of race in magazine covers. And I particularly looked at Out and Advocate for all the issues from a certain time period that uses the title hottest or sexiest, because they always do these lists, right? 10 hottest men, 50 sexiest men, to see who they're putting on these covers when they're going to say these are universal measures of attractiveness. Uniformly, of course, in my time frame, they're all white. And the worst part sometimes is that they pick, they pick white men who are publicly straight instead of a gay color to include in the hottest list, which I find is awfully problematic. In The Advocate, they also universalize gay norms as being white. So it's the sexy summer issue, or a day in gay America is clearly a white man. Men of color are always spoken as exceptions. These are real quotes. When they talked about Shamar Moore, one of the readers commented, "I'm not attracted to black men, but Shamar Moore is so good looking, he transcends race and ethnicity." So again, if you're a black man and you want a gay white man to like you or think you're attractive, you have to be outside of your race in some way. Describing him, his face and looks are so different than any other black guy out there. So the only reason he's attractive is because he just doesn't look like a black guy. And when I look at him, I think, well, how could they not think he's black? But that's just me. Even the writer wrote, his face and looks so different than any other black guy out there because of his interesting mix. Moore's father is African American, and his mother, who was born in Roxbury, Massachusetts, is of Irish and French Canadian descent. I was struck by sort of, his father is just black, but his mother has a place of origin and a very emphasized identity that is very, very white. This isn't to say that black men never make the cover of these magazines. For example, when they talk about sports or music. The sports issue has a black guy, and the music issue has a black guy. But outside of these very sort of racialized and culturally appropriated things, black men, or Asian men for that matter, never make it onto the cover. The worst sort of perpetration of this sort of racialized sexuality is all the talk about the down low, where the down low is shown as a deviant form of black sexuality. And this all, the down low was something that talked about before Dennis and Lewis, but Dennis and Lewis sort of threw a rock in the puddle by writing this article for the New York Times Magazine that has been cited thousands of times, which I find really sort of interesting. And he wrote, today, while there are black men who are openly gay, it seems that the majority of those having sex, that's his words, the majority of black men having sex with other men, still lead these secret lives. And he blames it on black culture that deems masculinity and fatherhood as black men's primary responsibility and homosexuality as a white man's perversion. Clearly, some people who know about this topic sort of, pushed back and said, God, there are plenty of white guys who are closeted having sex with men. So as if to make matters worse, Dennis and Lewis wrote a follow-up for Slate magazine. Just in case people are wondering, he said, yeah, of course there are white men who are having sex. But the down low is a uniquely African-American creation. He goes on to further say, if the closet is a stifling, lonely place for white guys who realize they're gay but aren't ready to admit it publicly, the down low is a VIP party for masculine black men who will never admit to being homosexual because they don't see themselves that way. Now, clearly, I have some questions for this man who wrote this thing. It's like, well, how closeted are these men if, as Dennis and Lewis notes, they attend these metaphorical VIP parties where sex with other men is the widely acknowledged intent of these parties. I don't know what a sexual VIP party is. Like, I'm envisioning like these velvet robes, right? As Kimberly saw, white men are being kept out, right? Again, in an entirely different context, though, right? So why would these men also accept and adopt a label that is openly understood as euphemism for man who has sex with men, if their primary goal is to hide their clandestine sexual activity? I mean, if the down low is a way to hide your sexual activity, it's probably the worst way to hide it. Just saying. So it's not a way for these guys to hide their sexual activity, it's more of a way for the mainstream media and gay media to present black sexuality as some sort of a threat. San Francisco Chronicle, secret gay encounters of black men could be rising women's infection rate. Even Oprah Winfrey, one of the biggest reasons why so many women are getting AIDS. The New York Times, AIDS fears grow for black women. The Washington Post, increasing urgency for black women. These are all headlines, right? The funniest thing is, even the Cleveland Plains Dealer had a story about the down low. I mean, if the Cleveland Plains Dealer is writing about this, the saddest part was that the Pause magazine, which is supposed to advocate for people who are HIV positive, even had a piece where it said, just as afternoon is waning, you'll find Jamal in a secluded section of Prospect Park. Young and good-looking, rocking a navy brown coat, baggy jeans, and a white do-rag. He's waiting, like the other men, idling on the edge of the wooded area for the sun to go down. After dark, he'll follow them down path into dense bushes to have anonymous and, in many cases, unprotected sex. But by day, Jamal is in a relationship with a woman with whom he has a 2-year-old daughter. Stacy doesn't know about Jamal's quick tryst in the shadows. In this narrative of down low, the people who are engaging in this very dangerous sexual behavior are all black men named Jamal who wear baggy pants. They're never named Larry or Ted. Because, Larry and Ted are not engaging in dangerous behaviors. So this isn't about the behavior. This is about black sexuality. And the black sexuality gets constructed as being very dangerous, right? They're dangerous, deviant, and hypersexual just by definition. Black is the color of the dirty secret of sex, and black sexuality is in contrast to, rather than similar to, pure white sexuality. So there's just no Brokeback for black men. So in part of my new book, I talk about the way that they talk about closeted sexual behaviors of married white men, and I look at discussions about James McGreeny and other sort of things where the contrast is excessive, where white men who engage in this behavior are seen as people who are struggling, who are seen as people who are trying their best, and who don't mean any harm, as opposed to black men are actively trying to deceive women, that this is a behavior they're engaging in knowingly without a care for other people's safety. So again, it ties in very nicely with sort of black sexuality as moral panic, right? We remember sort of the Birth of a Nation, which is, the whole gist of the book. Well, the movie is based on the book that was originally called The Klansman, right? And if a book is called The Klansman, it's not like something you're thinking, oh wow, it must be really nice to black people. So the Central Park Five was a case of 5 young black guys who got sentenced to go to prison and accused, prosecuted, and sentenced to go to prison for raping a white woman, who, by the way, apparently, even though all analysis said, well, they were in the park at the same time as this woman. This was Central Park. This was like, I don't know if you've ever been to Central Park. This is not like the Commons out here, right? You can sort of say. So imagine if I said to you, you know what, there was a theft in San Francisco, and you were there. Now you're my primary suspect. That's how stupid this was, right? But yet, they still got, even though all evidence showed that if they had to, if from where they were seen in the park to where the woman was raped, they would have had to move faster than the Flash, right? And yet, they were still prosecuted. When we talk about Asian men, it's sort of differently gendered, but the racism is the same. That these are sort of the interesting quotes from a HBO documentary about a white guy who goes and marries a trans woman from Thailand. I really like the last line, right? She's very feminist. She's sexy like a girl is sexy and horny like a boy is horny. You couldn't ask for anything more than that in a person. The trope of Asian femininity, right, also dates back a very long time. And these are very different types of ways of presenting men of color. However, they achieve the same thing. They achieve the same thing by comparing these sort of deviant gender and sexuality to the normal white male sexuality and white male gender performances. And this is probably best exemplified by David Henry Hwang's play M. Butterfly, where M. Butterfly is based on a true story where a Chinese opera singer fooled this French lieutenant into thinking he was a woman for 20 years, and when they get arrested, the judge asks, how did you do this? And so the main character actually says, it wasn't, simply the gist is, it wasn't me. Since I'm an Asian man, this white guy could never see me as really a man, right? And they never will. And again, Detail magazines, they did, yeah. Detail magazine, which is, for folks who don't know Detail magazine, it's like the unofficial publication for closeted gay men. And so and they did this gay or something column. And the problem is that everything else was a chosen category for yourself. So it was gay or cowboy, right? Gay or firefighter, gay or socialite. Asian was the only racial group characterized in this way. So it was that you can easily be, Now the problem with this clip is that for all the other ones, the following logic is that you're easily mistaken for one, but you can't be both, right? So if you're gay, you're not a real firefighter. If you're gay, you're not a real cowboy. And therefore, if you're Asian, you're not really gay, you just sort of seem that way. This femininity of Asianness gets seen in a British magazine cover. So you can see that the white guy on the cover looks very kind of butch, and he might like, I don't know, mug you. The Asian guy is getting ready for like the herbal essence commercial.
You're dating yourself.
Probably the worst perpetrator was the Service Members Legal Defense Fund. They did, when they were trying to get, don't ask, don't tell, thrown out, they put out a series of ads where it was let him serve, let her serve, or let them serve. Every ad that had more than one person in it that they put out said let them serve. This was the only exception. You can see which one of these men is the soldier who can't serve and which is the supporting wife. How to get away with murder. Connor finds Oliver, who is an Asian man, and Oliver, in their sort of one of their sexual tries, Oliver says, let's not have sex because that's all Connor ever wants to do. And Connor is presented as a very sexually dominant top, and that's established in many of the episodes. And Oliver says, let's not have sex, let's do what other normal couples do, to which Connor responds, what's next? We change our relationship status on Facebook. We know clearly who's taking on a feminine role in this relationship, who's taking on a masculine role. This particular episode of Grey's Anatomy won an Emmy Award as well for representing gays and lesbians as, being an accurate representation of gays and lesbians. This picture is a little odd in that in the episode, the white bartender is much taller than his Asian partner. And the reason this won was because this episode was based on all the straight male doctors going fishing, and they invite Joe, the bartender at the bar they hang out at. And the chief surgeon, who is an older black man, is uncomfortable at first. But upon talking to Joe, he finds out gay people are just like straight people. How does he come to this realization? Well, they talk about wanting to have kids, and the chief surgeon says, Adele, his wife, they always want to have kids, but Adele said, I'm not going to raise my kids alone because he's always working. And to that, the bartender says, yeah, Walter, his partner, we want to have kids too, but Walter says the same thing. He doesn't want to raise a kid by himself because I'm always working at the bar. To which the chief surgeon realizes that Joe and Walter, the couple, are just like him and his wife. Unfortunately, the bartender Joe is just like him and Walter is just like his wife. To make matters worse, while all the men are fishing, including Joe, we see Walter off in the distance on the rock reading a book. That is the most fair and accurate gay representation that Glad Daddy said the TV provided us. Leads to things like this, collected by a website called Douchebags of Grindr. We've certainly collected these douchebags. I don't even log on here anymore because I only get messages by fat, ugly cows, Asians, or dirty guys. You can block people on Blinder from sending you messages. This guy, he blocks more Asians than the Great Wall of China. This guy on the right, you should have a face pic and a huge lack of Asianness. The left man, he wants you to know his political affiliation because he don't like Jews or Negroes. And the guy on the right doesn't speak Ebonics. But he doesn't speak hygiene either, so that's okay. The language of preference online is always given as a biological preference, and that they're not racist because, they would be perfectly happy to be friends with black people. They just don't want to sleep with them, or Asians, right? Usually these guys will tell you how unracist they are because, after all, they love Beyonce. The problem with it, though, as one poster pointed out, is that usually when I want chicken, not veal, I order chicken. I don't tell the whole restaurant that the veal is fucking gross and anyone who approaches me with veal is an idiot. Nor do I come up with some kind of vague insult or slur against it. Right? Why does this happen? Well, it's because whiteness used to normalize gay white men. And whiteness comes to be the yardstick by which all other men are judged, and gay white men win acceptance at the expense of gay men of color. If you have to present gay people as being just like everyone else, you also have to repeat everyone else's relational patterns. To do so, you need a husband and a wife. And how do you do that? You make sure that if the white man is seen as the husband and everyone else is seen as the wife, or, in like Rick James tells us, there's the kind of woman that you take home to your mom and the other kind. Black men are the other kind, and Asian men are the kind you take home to your mother, which still makes him the normative male. What now? I don't know. And my time is up anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And Moya, what do you need by way of... So even though I'm not introducing people while they're getting set up, I cannot resist introducing Moya as the very first ever postdoctoral fellow in digital humanities and women's gender and sexuality studies. In the work, that's right. A great idea, so one you could take back to your own institutions.
Hello, everyone. Hi. How are you doing?
Good. How are you?
I am going to be talking a little bit about my project that I'm working on. This is a social project looking at sort of playing off of what we were just talking about, how people are represented in the media, but I'm looking at how queer people of color are actually representing themselves. So I'm looking at some of the web series that Black queer women have been producing. A lot of them coming out of Atlanta and DC, places where there are large communities of Black queer women. And so today I want to show a little clip from my favorite of these queer, Black queer web series, and this one is called Sky's the Limit. So
Moya, can we move you back in back of the microphone?
We want to make sure your mic is working.
Okay.
Or do you want this handheld?
Yeah, thank you. So okay, is that better? Everyone here? Okay, great. So of these web series, Sky's the Limit is my personal favorite, not just because I have friends that are in the cast, but I think it's actually pretty well written, and the direction is really, I think that they were trying to think about this both as a product in terms of the content that they were creating and the experiences that the actors were having, and the story that they were trying to tell. So I'm gonna play the first part of this episode called Feasting on Scraps. We are on episode 8 of 9 episodes of the series. Our protagonist, Sky, has lost her job and is trying to rebuild, and a friend of her has suggested that she see a therapist. So this is her meeting with her therapist. This is after they've been meeting pretty regularly.
Jay was everything to me. I loved her in a way that I didn't even think was possible, but waiting for her to love me back just got to be too hard, so I cut her out of my life. And yet somehow she's back, and I feel like we might have a chance this time. A real one. And making it work.
So is she single?
What?
Look, no offense, love, but from what you just told me, this woman seems to be under the impression that she can come and go as she very well please without any regard to your feelings.
No, it wasn't like that. She didn't know that I liked
Oh,
us.
trust me, she knew. One look at those big brown eyes of yours, and even Ray Charles could see what you were feeling. She knew, and she used your silence against you. So again, this time around, is she single? Or has she at least grown up enough to make herself emotionally available to you?
It's not that simple. She was in a previous relationship way before we reconnected.
So the answer is no. She's not single.
Not yet.
And you're still waiting.
No, we're rebuilding on our friendship while she transitions out of her last relationship. That's it. It's totally legit.
Is this what you and Taylor were fighting about?
Amongst other things, why?
When's the last time you ate?
What? I thought we were talking about me and Jay.
Just humor me. When's the last time you ate?
It's been a pretty busy day, so I haven't eaten anything since this morning.
So are you hungry?
Now that you've mentioned it, yes, I'm starving.
And from what you told me in the past, you're a little bit of a health nut, yes?
I do my best to stay in shape, so?
So, if you were starving even more than you are now, and I offered you a bag of chips, would you take it?
As hungry as I am right now, yes, I probably would.
And that's the problem. Our spirit body isn't that different from our physical one. And you, my dear, are so spiritually starved for affection that you're willing to consume whatever bits of emotional junk food that comes your way.
Wait, I don't think that's a fair comparison.
It most certainly is. This woman isn't offering you anything of substance. She's in a relationship with another woman and is giving you whatever's left over, when and how she feels like it. You are feasting on scraps, Sky. Little bits and pieces of ambiguous romance that is leaving you full, but never truly satisfied. And for some strange reason, you actually convinced yourself that that's okay. Why is that?
What the hell am I supposed to do, Indigo? She has a girlfriend. We're friends. I'm doing the best I can with the cards I've been dealt. My hands are tied.
You don't get it, do you? Get what? Darling, you only get the love that you think you deserve. If you can't see fit to make yourself a priority, how can you expect anyone else to? Jay is only getting away with this because you are letting her.
But I don't know.
So what I really appreciate about this script is, or this particular episode in this clip, is that we get to see a representation of Black queer women that we don't often see in the media, and particularly for Black people who are assumed not to have access to mental health care services, or for that to be something that's stigmatized within our community. I think it's really important that we see this exchange happening. Also that it looks very different from counseling scenarios that you see on TV. Her Indigo is kind of a firecracker, and in other episodes where you see her interaction, she's really pushing Sky's self-perception and her sort of the narratives that she has about herself, which is something I don't normally see when I watch television and see people engaging with their therapists. So I really find this trope and some of the things that they're doing with the series opening up our thoughts about how we can represent ourselves and what are important conversations to be happening in certain communities. And so I'm gonna fast forward to the end so that you can see a little bit about what happens during the production of the series, which to me is also part of this thread of changing the narrative and changing how we think about different groups being represented when they have the opportunity to represent themselves.
Behind the scenes.
Sky's the limit. We actually stopped production to take tea breaks. You don't.
Tea!
Stop
It's tea!
Tea makes you want to get back in the old country.
Now,
Southeast DC?
you know it!
The old country of Southeast DC?
Must be got to be exact.
Yeah, it's tea time and then it costs tea. Cold as a motherfucker. Cold as a motherfucker. It looks so sunny. Yeah, perfect. It looks so funny. They're gonna think, oh, Bryn Daniels and her crazy girlfriend Tracy were on a sunny day just shooting. Nah, son, not even. That's gonna be playing out your whole relationship with hands and facial expressions and you shrugging her off and stuff. Yeah. Okay. Okay, Nicole, pull her earlobes and she knows what to move your head. Practice, pull her earlobes.
Brandon is such a dick.
Well, that was smooth. You can tell she didn't reject it was the best way possible. They don't gotta reject it. I just wanted when her phone is working. I didn't even know we broke up. I thought she was just getting a new phone. We were going together? Wait, I didn't know that.
Let me show you this one.
Duh.
It's this. No, it's not.
Like that. She walked past.
I think it's because your arm is longer than you.
Your arm is longer than every day.
So I like that they've ended the production with a little bit of what their process is like, the kind of camaraderie that they have while they're filming, and the fact that they're thinking about each other as human beings outside of just the production of the series. And in part of that, we get to see a little bit about what kind of community they're trying to create that comes out of making the film. So in addition to people having access to the series, people are actually creating a community and are making connections. So some of the people who were working on the project were in relationships, got into new relationships. Like there's a whole community life that's happening outside and off screen, and they're offering people a venue into that. And I've also seen this in terms of how feminists who are working in feminist porn also do this process of really talking to actors and talking about the production and how they're trying to change the lens and get people to think about the people who are performing beyond the way that they're generally represented in the series. So through Sky's the Limit and some of these other web shows, we have access to a kind of conversation about queer relationships that we really don't see anywhere else. And so that is what I'm trying to explore in my own work. Thank you.
Hi. My name's Wagatwe, and I'm going to talk about new media and feminism, and more specifically talking about how the internet is basically used by feminists to combat rape culture. So we're going to go over a few examples of everyday life and sort of what it means to us and why are feminists so obsessed with the internet. Or maybe I'm just projecting and that's not true, but I'm obsessed with the internet and I'm a feminist, and yeah. So I like to say we're in a golden age of feminist activism. I don't know if have folks been hearing anything in the news in the past couple of years. I feel like, there's some hashtag that's trending, something is happening. So it's cancel Colbert. I think people have heard about, yes, all women, all these things have been happening. And there's a few common threads that I think that we see, or that I've seen when I'm looking at why are we turning to the internet to express ourselves. So some of the common themes I've been seeing is that, there's the ability to find your voice and your ability to have your voice heard in a way that the mainstream media likely won't consider. And it's a really great way to find community with each other and create a community. So for me personally, I'm a survivor of sexual violence, and I was kicked out of school, and I had to go back home. And when I was at home, I was very isolated because I lived in suburbia major. I didn't have a car. I didn't have any money. So I couldn't even use my car to use money to take the train or anything. So I used the internet to create a sort of community to connect with other people and to share my story on my own terms, which ended up being a really great opportunity. It was also a great way for self-empowerment and for representation. I think we see as we've been talking about representation for this segment. It's very limited. It's often very racist and sexist and heterosexist. So it's great to be able to use the internet to sort of flip the script and expand a little bit of what we're seeing and hearing. So there was a campaign by Women Action in Media. It was called the Facebook Rape Campaign. And essentially it was, I don't know, has anyone ever reported an offensive post or page on Facebook? All right, how many times was it taken down? Right. So essentially there was these really misogynist, really violent, horrific posts that were on Facebook, and people kept reporting it, and they would stay up, but then if you posted a picture of you breastfeeding your child, Facebook would take it down immediately. Or if it's a fat, naked person, and it's supposedly supposed to be okay, those would be taken down immediately as well. So what Women Action in Media did is that they created a campaign where they are targeting the advertisers on the side of the groups. So people would take a screenshot of one of the examples would be a woman who's beaten very bloody, and they have captions like, haha, next time don't get pregnant, something really terrible. And so they would say, hey, Zipcar, oh, hey, Nissan, your ads are being run next to this really horrific, violent, misogynist page. Are you okay with that? And so people were sending emails, tweets, Facebook posts, comments, and finally Facebook had to listen because the companies would be like, no, we're not okay with this, and they took down the ads. They pulled the ads completely. So you're taking money out of Facebook's pocket, and fortunately, because I feel like there's still a little change that needs to happen. But what we see is that people were able to speak up, they were able to speak back against rape culture on Facebook. People like to say, oh, free speech. Facebook doesn't have to guarantee you free speech. So I think we should be working to creating safer environments. Unfortunately, Facebook did kind of change their policies. So now pages that are controversial, they can choose not to have any advertisements shown. So now no one can use that same tactic again, which is kind of a bummer. But I think it shows that they really saw how effective that was, and they really didn't want to be strong-armed again down the road to do something that they didn't want to do. So another campaign is called EDEK Now, and that's something that I was a part of in 2013. We did a petition to the Department of Education. It was in July, I believe, basically telling the Department of Education that they need to do their job to enforce Title IX in regards to sexual violence. Essentially, schools had been violating Title IX pretty blatantly. Students were filing Title IX complaints now because now they're starting to know their rights, but then the Department of Education wasn't doing its job and really enforcing it. So they'd be taking 4 years to really resolve it. They would, you know, it was a really opaque process. They weren't really finding schools that were in violation, actually in violation. They would try to do compromises and early resolution agreements. So we said, hey, schools are not going to do their job unless you force them. It's clear. Schools have been covering up rape for a very long time. So why don't you do your job and make them do what's necessary? So we got a petition. It was on change.org. You can check it out. It's at change.org/edaknow. And we got about 180,000 signatures. We had a rally outside the Department of Education in Washington, D.C., and we were able to have meetings with administrators at the White House and as well as the Office for Civil Rights and Department of Ed, and got to meet Secretary Duncan. It was pretty cool, you know, not bad. So we wouldn't have been able to get those meetings if we didn't have all these people signing our petition. And we wouldn't have been able to have this huge petition if we didn't have a bunch of people, you know, that have the internet available for a bunch of people to see something in their inbox and sign on for that. So that was a way for us to sort of show the relationship between online and offline activism. The digital realm basically gave us legitimacy for us to be able to get really concrete change. And that campaign/petition was actually one of the big reasons why President Obama created the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault. So we were able to sort of use our personal experiences to create widespread change across the country. And, you know, this is something that's going to be taking a number of years, but we're really able to get earned media, not just online, but in person. You know, people were there, we got a really great connection, and people were able to follow us. And it was a really great way to have a form of transparency. So as we continued with our work, we would update our website and our blog and say, hey, we're about to have a meeting. This is what we're going to tell them. This is what we want. So it's also a great way to show that, hey, we know what we're doing. We're not just sort of, you know, I don't know, talk about rape for fun, if anyone does that. You know, we are serious people who we know what we're doing, and we've been doing our research and we know what's at stake. Has anyone heard of Yes All Women, I'm assuming? Yes. Right, so that's the hashtag that was in response to Elliot Rodgers' murders, and it trended internationally. People use it as a response to when people talk about, oh, you know, men, blah, 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 and people are like, oh, not all men rape. And it's like, yes, we know, but we're not trying to make the conversation about men. So instead of making it about men, they flipped the script and said, yes, all women. Yes, all women have this experience. Yes, not all men rape. However, yes, all women have had some experience of sexual violence, and that's an issue, and that's what we need to be talking about, not talking about how a vast majority of men are not, aren't rapists. So just one example, because girls are taught what not to do to avoid rape, but boys aren't taught nearly enough about consent. Yes, all women. So there's a lot of other tweets, and I didn't really want to post them just because they could be triggering, and I didn't want to have too many triggering posts up there. But it was a really great way to show the people creating community, people sharing their stories, flipping the script and speaking back against one of the pervasive aspects of rape culture in our society. At its peak, the Hashtag had 51,000 tweets an hour, which is a lot, and it now has its own Wikipedia page, which is kind of cool. So that's like on my bucket list, to get a hashtag to have its own Wikipedia page that I've made. And yeah, so I think that's one of those aspects that, yes, it was a great way to respond, but also there was a little bit of a backlash, and it's sort of the double-edged sword that you start to see over time, is that yes, all women really took off. However, the woman who created the hashtag became targeted by a lot of misogynist abuse, and that's something that, that's the cost of visibility that we see here. It was sort of like, yes, it's great that there's visibility of us to speak against rape culture, but there's also the personal, often very personal costs that women have to make. So this is Jada. She was sexually assaulted, and she didn't know until pictures of it were being shared on social media. So once again, we're seeing this double-edged sword. People were also victim blaming her, et cetera, and no one was doing anything. So there's all this evidence out there, but the police weren't taking it seriously. So Jada was willing to finally, she was willing to go into media and share her story, and she tried to flip the script once again and said, I'm going to use the I am Jada, because the initial hashtag was called Jada Pose, and people were making fun of like of her being passed out in a certain position, and people were saying, oh, haha, I'm like Jada, because she was passed out. I believe she had been drinking when she was assaulted. And then we also have to consider here, this is a young woman of color. It's really hard for Black women to be taken seriously as survivors of sexual violence, especially through the court system, but also just in the court of public opinion. Very often, Black women are seen as these hypersexual beings that just can't be raped, and we are inherently more deceptive, and thus we must be lying about rape, and therefore we don't matter. And also, when we're thinking about the types of survivors that we see, or the type of stories that we see, there is this idea of a perfect victim, right? And we have to think about whose bodies are valuable and whose virtue are we trying to protect. And very often, we're not seeing Black women as the type of people that deserve that sort of protection or concern. So last year, there was a column in the Washington Post by a man called George Will, and he talked about how women are lying, like people just want to have this coveted status of being a survivor because you get all these certain privileges. Apparently in his world, being raped is awesome. You get all these perks that I never got. So the first tweet that I did was before I did it as a hashtag, but this is what launched it. I was really upset. I was on a bus going to Washington, D.C. to talk about actually my activism and my story. And I didn't want to scare the person sitting next to me because they were a stranger. And I was like, what is a really productive way for me to respond to this? And I was thinking, hey, let me just be really sarcastic and just like keep it real and say like, hey, there is a literal cost to being raped sometimes. Like there are a lot of consequences when institutions fail to do their job to protect survivors. And I started off with, hey, I have a bunch of student loans, and it's traumatizing paying Sally Mae, but imagine doing that when it's like to pay loans that you used to attend a school that didn't care that you were raped. That's not a privilege in my point of view. He can get $50,000 for one speaking gig, and I wish I could get that much too, because that would put a little bit of a dent of the student loan debt that I have from attending Tufts. So that's just sort of one of the things where it's like it took off, it was really surprising, but people were able to find that community. We were speaking out against the Washington Post, the column, and one of the newspapers dropped his column from syndication, and that's money out of George Will's pocket. So that just shows that like speaking up online can really have a great experience, but like yes, there's a personal benefit of being able to share my story and blow off some steam, but people really loved being able to connect with other folks and feel like they're not alone. And it was great to, annoy George Will a little bit. I know he did a little bit of a rant on C-SPAN about me, so that was kind of cool. I love making, old white dudes upset, basically. So this is another hashtag. Have people heard about Emma Sulkowicz at Columbia University? So she was assaulted, and Columbia didn't find her assailant accountable. She said that the system was really corrupt and they didn't do their job. So for her senior thesis, she's an art student. She's carrying around her mattress whenever she's on Columbia grounds. And she's doing it until her rapist is expelled. So she's probably going to carry that mattress across the graduation stage at this rate. So there was this big expose showing this conversation, Facebook messages between Emma and her assailant, and it was supposed to show that, like, oh, look, they actually communicated, and so it shows that she wasn't actually raped, because what kind of raped person talks to their assailant ever again? So I joined forces with a young woman named Julie, and she writes for Mike, and we started a hashtag, There's No Perfect Victim, and we tried to use that again as a way to speak up against another publication. People would be able to share their stories and have create that community, but also it was a way for us to educate the public, and I think that's really important, that we don't really spend the time to talk about the complexities of sexual violence and its aftermath. We don't really talk about, hey, you know, in a perfect world, yes, you would be really mad at your assailant and never speak to them again, or you tell them off, but if someone's capable of committing such a violent act, sometimes you're going to do a few things to make sure that they don't lash out against you again. And we really need to talk about the reality of that. So There's No Perfect Victim was a great way, I think, to talk about all the different ways that people respond to sexual violence and talk about the different situations that people find themselves. Oh yeah, and we were on Upworthy, so that was kind of cool. So recently, I think it's a panty liner with a piece of paper. It says, imagine if men were as disgusted with rape as they are with periods. And this is by a German artist. And essentially, she wanted to create art to show that feminism isn't about hating men, but it's about equality, which is, you know, always a great thing to talk about. So she basically started off by talking about rape culture, and new media here is really important because, yes, this is a physical piece of art, but it was actually the internet that made it really blow up, and then other people started participating in the world. So it was another way to sort of kind of make people think and connect with an art they probably never would have seen. And I think one of the great parts about the internet is that the audience can be so much bigger than it would be in person, and it really took off. And you would see, you know, on Tumblr had over 350,000 notes, which means either 350 people either liked it or reblogged it or both. And it got coverage, and it was on Instagram as well. And because of that, now we're seeing more people try to compare what rape culture is and speak up against it. Sorry, I'm a little bit sick and my throat's drying. So one of the reasons why I was drawn to the internet, I think why we see a lot of feminists drawn to the internet, is that we are able to, thank you. Oh, you're too kind. Sorry. I think one of the reasons why, at least I have been drawn to the internet, I know a lot of feminists are drawn to the internet, is that we're able to not just speak to the choir, and we're really getting a lot more people to engage with our work. And it gives a voice to the people that normally wouldn't have any sort of attention. I'm sure a lot of people probably see that if there wasn't for the internet, and people just like rip it off or walk by. So yes, there's like a lot of benefits to having the internet, and a lot of people are able to create their own media and do it on their own terms, which is also really awesome. But unfortunately, like we said, there's sort of a double-edged sword. There's some downsides to it, and it's some of the things that we use new media to kind of talk back against mainstream media, but unfortunately, the internet sometimes replicates some of the problems that we're trying to avoid. So like with representation, like who are we seeing when we're talking about sexual violence? Like what survivors are we seeing? Very often, especially when it comes to campus rape, it's, you know, young, white passing, cisgender, straight passing young women at an elite university. And we only hear about certain types of assaults usually. Whether it's the athlete or maybe it's just a one-time thing or the fraternity party, but there's people who are assaulted in the context of relationships, or maybe the person was, maybe they were drunk, or maybe they were completely sober, maybe there wasn't, a bunch of evidence, physical evidence or bruising or broken bones, but it's still something that's really important for us to hear about. So this is something that Jessica Valenti wrote. It was a blog, and it was just when people were talking about, hey, women, have you ever thought about not drinking and maybe you won't get raped? Because that's like a really original idea. And it's like, yes, finally, now we're going to stop rape because you brought it up. But so this is just some of the pictures. So she created a post. It was about like maybe 8 pictures. And when we were looking at this, it's like we see all these white girls. We see them all drinking and probably being inappropriate or something like that. And then also, if you notice, some of them don't even have their faces for really objectifying, because it's sort of like, hey, it's about your actions, not about full human beings. And notice none of these pictures involve a rapist. Where's the rapist? So we're sort of seeing like where society is kind of focused, and we're looking at the white women and the victims rather than, hey, let's stop rape by telling people not to rape and let's hold rapists accountable. But instead, we're always looking at victims and we're trying to blame them for what they're doing. Her caption says, the media's interest in rape culture these days seems to rest solely in young women's behavior. Rapists? What rapists? What's particularly telling is the pictures these outlets choose to accompany their articles. Young white women partying, sometimes their heads cut out of the picture for full dehumanization action, simultaneously shows who the media is most interested in and who our culture is most interested in protecting the virtue of. And I think we see this replicated also in person. I once was at a press conference at Senator Gillibrand's office, and I was the only person of color, or at least like ostensibly person of color. And no one took pictures of me, but everyone else, they're like, you could barely hear the people talking. And then I come up and they're like, the photographers took a break and they just weren't as interested because I just didn't fit the script of the sort of person that, people want to see or the people that they want to sympathize with. There's this trend, unfortunately, of the media coming out like, oh, we really want to talk about sexual assault. I don't know how many times reporters or producers would tell me like, yeah, there's this issue. We want to talk about sexual assault on college campuses. Like, we really want to, but we want to find a survivor who's this, and this. And they want a really specific story that sort of just perpetuates all the trend that we've been seeing all this time. And they're not really trying to show us anything new. They're just trying to jump on the bandwagon, which just reinforces our conceptions about what bodies matter and how much and why. So another, just a little tiny note. So there's another note talking about, when it's race and gender, right? Jameis Winston at Florida State, his victim, a white woman. So we have to think about also, are people more willing and more willing to listen because of who the victim is? And we see that also replicated in the court system, which I think is really important for us to talk about, because our media does influence how rape culture is used and how we address and respond to rape off the screen. Who are we hearing? Very often, like I said, we're just hearing from a lot of white girls, which isn't necessarily bad, right? Like, they're their stories, but very often it's just hard to find people who are not at the elite university, who don't have the ability, the people who are able to afford mental health counseling off campus, the people who are able to afford the lawyers. All these different things are contributing to us seeing a very certain type of victim. And it's very interesting also just like in body representation also, like you only really see like thin young women, which is interesting for us to talk about. But essentially, I think that this is really important because one of the biggest perpetuators of sexual violence is silence and stigma. And this is why it's so important for us to listen to all the stories that are available out there. A lot of people don't know Title IX also applies to community college survivors, but do we hear about survivors from community colleges? Why is that? What kind of people go there usually? I went to Tufts and then I went to community college afterwards, and I can tell you the demographics are a lot different, and the experiences of the people are a lot different. So it makes me think about, why are we only hearing from certain people? Like, why is it so hard to get folks from, other walks of life or more diverse form of walks of life to get them in front of the camera? Would they ever be on the cover of the New York Times, like some folks from University of North Carolina? Probably not. So there's I think there's like a big public health issue when we're talking about this, because yes, feminists are getting more bold than ever, and they're being able to use the internet to sort of talk back against a new weapon that I think has been forged in supporting rape culture or perpetuating it. But when we think about rape victims, 1/3 of them consider suicide. 13% of rape victims actually attempt suicide. And a big part of comfort, or a big source of comfort, is knowing they're not alone and knowing that they're going to be heard and believed. And that's why we really need to work to diversify the representation that we're seeing out there, because I know it's helped me, and I can know how hard it can be to, browse and be like, oh, I'm looking for someone that looks like me or has an experience like me, and not seeing there. Then you start doubting, oh, was I really raped? Or is this serious? Am I going to be able to get justice? So once we try to work to be more inclusive and be more intersectional in the way that we're talking about sexual violence, I think that we would be able to use new media in an even more equal way to combat rape culture. So thank you.
So the floor is now open for questions and responses. I guess I will just take 1 minute to say that it seems to me that one theme that carries over a little bit and even more becomes more apparent from the previous panel is the whole question of visibility, right? Not only who has it and who doesn't, but when do you want it, and what are its downsides. I think that another latent kind of topic in the previous panel that surfaces in this, which is related to visibility, is the question of commodification, right? So part of the question of the control of visibility is the question of, is it really yours, or is it sort of easily commodified? I love the example of Facebook, right, and how quickly they're able to pivot, to change their practices. So those are some things I saw. Other people might have seen other things. The floor is open. And again, if you'll just remember to stand up if you have a question so that everyone can hear you. Yes, please.
I just have a question. So there was this hierarchies of desire, and I'm just absent were Latino men, and I just wonder how they figure into that.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then the other question I had was on the social media. There's also the hierarchies of visibility around rape, and I'm wondering if the social media is a platform for more women of color who are experiencing sexual violence to self-represent in, like documentaries like this, or I don't really use Twitter. I use it, but I don't know how really to use it. Are these new outlets for women of color actually to take a stand and find community, or are they still invisible in those social spaces as well?
You can go first.
Want to go first?
Yeah, I think originally when I first started to work on this project, I was going to look at all men, including Latino men and Native American men, because I was particularly taken by the Village People, where the, it's 5 gay fetishes, and the only one that's not a choice is quote, the Indian, right? So, but when I started to do the research, I was really taken aback by difficulty of placing Native Americans and particularly Latinos in this racialized frame that the gay community uses, particularly because Latinos seem to, on the one hand, they are hypersexualized, but usually, like taglines on the Douchebags of Grindr, there's a lot of white guys who say, into vanilla and spice, not chocolate and rice. Right? So they exclude Black and Asian men specifically, but they include Latino men. I think that's a reflection of where Latino male sexuality is in relationship to Black and Asian men. Even if we look at sort of heterosexual relationships, right, this idea of a Latin lover has always been acceptable to white women, as opposed to Black men and Asian men have not been acceptable to white women. So I'm trying to see how that frames in to work in a little bit of Latino and Native American men, but they don't quite fit the racial dynamic the gay community uses to get whiteness.
Does this work?
I think so. Give it a
Hello?
tap.
Don't fall.
Just pass it. No, okay, let me just pass it.
Thank you.
Hello? Okay. Yep.
Yeah, so I definitely think that Black women especially are able to use social media to get heard. I know for me, the only reason why I'm in front of you today is because of the internet. I actually, I made a website, taught myself to use a website. I made social media accounts and I shared my story. And before then, I actually would speak to a few producers at a few media outlets, and they always kind of passed me over to show the white girls raped by Black men. And it wasn't really until I was able to sort of use a grassroots way to build an audience and some more legitimacy to have people hear me. And I think now Twitter, there's this thing called Black Twitter, because Black people are really well represented on Twitter. They use it a lot, so it's been a great way. There's hashtags like You OK Sis, which talks about Black women experiencing sexual harassment. So it's there. It's not as visible as we would like, and obviously, we live in a white supremacist society, so white people or white women are often going to get the most attention, but it's there.
I definitely think that there's something about social media and the ability of the internet to transform and create opportunities for these messages to go farther than they could before. I mean, just thinking about what you were saying about production, the fact that people are able to take this media into their own hands creates the platform for conversations that don't happen in mainstream news outlets. So with some of these web shows, like Between Women, they have nearly 1 million views on some of their episodes and are in their 3rd season. Sky's the Limit only has 1 season, but when it went off, there were about 40,000 YouTube hits. So it's creating a network of people who, while simultaneously engaging mainstream media, are also able to connect through these other platforms.
Yes.
I have a question about new media. So I'm thinking Twitter's trending is a specific company's, is based on an algorithm, a company-owned algorithm,
Right.
Of what is important to be visible. Are there ways that y'all are imagining social media and Twitter that are not with the aim to trend, or maybe to disrupt that private algorithm? That's one question. And the other part is Angela Davis. I was remembering during y'all's talk, Angela was talking about if you replace the prison guard's outfit with civilian clothes, the strip search or the cavity search or the daily forms of sexual violence that are really present in prisons would be really jarring to many more people. So I'm wondering if y'all are seeing some great strategies between new media and places where people are forcibly isolated from media and accessing media, and how those conversations are happening, because I think y'all are brilliant.
Well, I definitely think people are having conversations in what we like to call the back channels of some of these things. So a lot of conversations are happening through direct messaging. I know something that, in thinking about the evolution of Twitter, there was a time before hashtags. So hashtags were something that the people invented. Now we're at a moment where direct messaging you can do with groups, which I think is something else that the people kind of made happen. So there are ways that people's own participation in these spaces push them to create other ways of being. I know that people are using private private Tumblr accounts or having conversations that aren't visible to the public but are still connecting people who have a public conversation in private spaces. So something that I see happen on Tumblr a lot is people will have a conversation and then say, meet me in the chat, and we'll provide a link to a chat with a password that you can only get if you're connected with certain people. So there are ways that people are still subverting like the visibility that can create some of these problems that we've been discussing.
Yeah, recently I was just starting to read an article about how, especially on Facebook, right, what's trending is a proprietary blend and you don't really know what it is and they keep it secret. So you're sort of kind of figuring out in the dark what is trending and what how to get something trending. Fortunately, with Twitter, it's not the same thing, at least not yet, knock on wood, where it is about the volume and what's going on. But sometimes you have to think about do you need something to be trending? And sometimes a hashtag is just used to connect with other people. You don't really want that visibility because you don't want a bunch of trolls in your mentions. Like the other day, I was critiquing the Race Together hashtag, and I don't know why I did that because a lot of angry white dudes in my mentions. Because I said, anyway. I won't go on a rant about fair trade. But anyway, so it's sort of a two-edged sword, I think, again, and it's really hard. What was your second part of the question? I had something.
Because I was really connecting to what you're saying about suburbia and isolation.
Mm-hmm.
And I was curious, to me, I've been thinking about places of isolation, like prisons and
Yeah.
and if there are ways that you are seeing new media being connected to from those places of isolation.
Yeah, I think it sort of plays into what you were saying earlier about people are having back channel conversations. And there's also, a few fundraisers and et cetera, and there's groups, now we have crowdsourcing or crowdfunding, I should say. So that's been really helpful. And it does allow people to have that connection, I think, you wouldn't be able to have before. And you can have people representing you. Like, even if you are isolated, there's people out there who are willing to dedicate their time to, help you out and put your story out there.
Mm-hmm. And the internet makes those groups possible as well, too.
Mm-hmm.
Because there are people who don't have access to stuff, but there are groups like, I always sleep, I can't remember if it's Pink and Black or Black and Pink.
Yeah.
But folks that will work on the outside to bring connections to people who are isolated in certain segments of the population. So I don't know if and for me particularly, Facebook has been this incredible source of just meeting people, right, that I would have never met anywhere else, doing incredible things, connected to people who probably don't have access to the technology that I have access to. So that would help.
So we have time for one more question, and I saw Julie's hand go up.
So thank you for your presentations. I actually want to continue on this line of access, because to me, I think coming from a political economy and moving to here, there's this question of, there's such a stark contrast between the access of the magazine industry and then what you can do online in terms of how it's more affordable and what that does to your organizing and representations. And I was wondering, have you either through your work with men and representations, or through your own personal work, have you been able to gain more in terms of not having to pay, right? So what is that conversation in terms of how do you organize a rep without, what does it allow you to do, really? So, I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Who wants the mic?
Okay. Yeah, so that was a big reason why I was drawn to using the internet as well. So after I left Tufts, I actually made a website about what happened, and I decided to go a little bit of a paid route. So you can make an account on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr for free. And I went a little bit up a notch, and I bought a domain, but I bought one for 89 cents. So you can have a legitimate domain. It was on sale. And I had $6 to my name at the time, and I bought the 89-cent thing, and then I found a coupon which I was able to find through Google, right, for free hosting, and put it out there. And also a great part about the internet is also being able to find resources or people telling you about free resources that are local. So I think that's really beneficial. But I think that's why people of color or people of marginalized identities in general are really drawn to the web, because you're able to, you don't have to worry about an economic barrier per se. You know, there's still the issue of internet access and broadband and computers, but you know, mobiles also really has taken off, and it's been really beneficial for people of different socioeconomic statuses.
And I think a lot of barriers are coming down, but there are differences between paid content and unpaid content, and who has access to that paid content and who doesn't, right? And unfortunately, the people who have, it's like this vicious cycle where the people who have access to paid content are also the same type of people creating those types of contents, keeping other people from making those contents. And I smirk a little bit when people say, well, the internet's a great equalizer. Well, the problem is, you know, I could put up a blog, but HuffPost will always get more hits than me, no matter what I try to do. And so it's not an equal playing field in that some people do have. So I largely focus in on the comments that readers leave as a way of looking at people who do have equal access, and pay less attention to the people who are actually throwing the content up. And I begin with the notion that the people who have the power to throw the content itself up have much more power, but once you get to the reader comments, you're playing with a different playing field. And so I find those things much more interesting than because the content really is, oh, look at this, like, yet another beautiful white man, right? And so there was actually a list called the hottest men with facial hair. Can you imagine? And they were all white, right? And so, but the first comment really was telling in that it was, you know, a man of color saying, you know, yet another list of the hottest white men, X, Y, Z, right? And so there is sort of a pushback, I think, and we'll see if the pushback goes anywhere.
So I want to thank Chong-suk for giving me a different way of thinking about the comments section, I must say, because that's, I'm going to meditate on that. Before we close this panel and thank our panelists, I just want to make a few housekeeping announcements, and tell me if I get this wrong, Susanna, but lunch is out there. Please feel free to help yourself to lunch, and we have a little bit of time to mill around, eat, perform other necessary functions, including possibly get a breath of fresh air if you need it. We will reconvene at 1 o'clock sharp for the student activist panel, and it's also fine if you're still eating your lunch at that time, right? You can bring it back to the table, and that will be moderated by our colleague Sarah Jackson. So before we go, a very big thanks to our panel.